and welcome to the inventory system from scratch tutorial for UEFN. Today we're going to be making this inventory system from scratch basically, and it just has an inventory where you can move items around, you can create your own items, item types, and we've got this thing where you can insert random items, and then we can use them, so we can use this one to give shield, health, we can take damage, then we can use these again to get health and shield. But yeah, we're going to go over all this, go over the UI, and this is going to be part one of a few parts. So to start off, we've got a blank project I've created in UEFN. You can just create it up here or just when you open UEFN, but you might want to do this in a project you've already got. And the only thing I've added so far is we've got a folder called item icons, and we've just got some textures for our items. So if you want to add some item textures, just make some textures for them. And make sure you've got the texture group to UI because we are going to be using these in UI. So let's get started. Right, so I'm now within VS Code. As you see, we've got our little folder structure on the left. There's nothing there. So we're going to quickly just create a template file by going into Verse Explorer over here. Then we just right click, add new verse file to project. Then we're going to just make a new device, and this is going to be a player manager. So this is basically just going to help us store some information about the player. Yeah, that's the only device we're going to need. So if we make that, we're also going to quickly place it down. If we build verse up there, actually there is a new button. Yeah, so we're going to build verse, get the player manager device here, which should be within your projects folder. We're going to place that device down, just leave it there, we don't care about any of that. Now if we go into VS Code again, we should have a new file for the creative device. Let's remove some of this stuff. We don't need most of that. I'm going to add squiggly brackets. You don't need to do this, but I would just follow what I'm doing here, just because this is how I like to set it up. I'm going to do this throughout we're going to use squiggly brackets to define our classes and functions rather than the other style. Okay, so we've literally just got a player manager device with an on begin, and we're going to basically, the point of this device is to give each player a class that stores some information about that player. So we want to store like an inventory for each player. So we're going to make this device that assigns an inventory to each player basically. So I guess to get started, we're actually going to also need another class that is going to be our player. So if we make a new class, I'm going to call this tutorial_player, but this will probably want to be like your prefix it with your project's name. And yeah, so create that file, and this is just going to be a pretty basic class. So just going to do tutorial_player, make it public, so that could be elsewhere class. Yeah, so this is literally just going to be a class that is basically it's like a wrapper class, which means that it wraps around a player. So it's like it's not an extension of player. It just adds extra information for this player. We've got a warning about a missing include, so we're going to just do that, add an include. And this class is going to contain a reference to the player, so within this class you can know what the actual player is. Now, I think we should just be able to get away with that, because we'll add more information later on, but for now we're going to basically just work on giving each player that little wrapper class. So we're going to add a map in our device that basically is a map of players to their wrapper class. Basically the Fortnite player and then our version of that player. So we could just assign each player one of those. So in the on begin, we're gonna need to listen for players joining the game. So we can then give them a wrapper class. So we're going to listen to the player added event. We're going to subscribe to it. Click that. Then we're just going to make a function for players being added. So if we do this, private probably. The function should just be player void. There we go. So inside this function, we're just going to create one of these tutorial player objects. So if we just make a new one, we're just going to call tutorial player equals create a new object, tutorial player, and then we need to define the player. So we're just defining this internal player variable we added in that class. So this is our new object, and basically this class will just have more stuff, more variables in it later on. Now it is just a class that contains player, which might be a bit weird. We're going to store this tutorial player object in that map. So if statement tutorial players player. So we're basically just adding this tutorial player object we created to the map, with the key being the player that owns object, and then we're just going to add a little print that says that we created player for them. Then we're also going to add a little error if it fails to create. This this error shouldn't happen, hopefully, unless something gets messed up elsewhere. But yeah, so that's basically each player now has one of these objects. We're also going to need to remove that object when the player leaves, so we're going to duplicate this line up there. We're going to listen for the player removed event, and we're going to call our function for a player being removed. I'm going to copy this function, change the name up here, then we can just get rid of most of that. And then basically in this, all we're going to do is just remove that this player from our map up here. But to do that inverse, we need to, unfortunately, it's quite long. We can't just call map.remove. We've got to basically copy the whole map, but just not copy the player. We're just going to copy the whole map except for the player that we're trying to remove. Could make a helper function, but I just wanted to make this a bit simpler. Yeah, so for each player in this map, we're going to add it. So down here, we're going to do this, which is a bit cheeky. But if we wrap this in a logic expression, then it will avoid an error. Could throw an error, but it's just a bit mundane. So we're going to basically add every player back to this. Add each player to this new map that is in the old map, except, so here we're going to basically do a condition. We're not going to add them to the map if they're equal, if they are the player that's being removed. Then all we need to do is we just need to do this to replace the variable pair with the new map we've created. And if we save that, it should be good. So basically now we have one of these tutorial player objects that we can store whatever we want on, and every player in the game should have one of these objects. Right, so next we're going to create a quick simple menu. So we're going to make a new verse file for that, because this is just going to contain class for the menu widget and all that. But we're actually going to put it in a folder called inventory. We want to separate our code a little bit for all the inventory stuff, and we're just going to call this inventory menu. Just going to be a file that just contains a class with all UI code in it. So let's just make a class. It needs to be public. Otherwise stuff outside this folder can't access it, as files within folders are basically within a module, and they're like internal to that module unless you specify. So we need to mark it as public. We're going to add a quick variable to this class, which is going to just be our tutorial, that tutorial underscore player object, and it's going to be basically who owns this UI, because we're going to need to call stuff this owner within. And then we're going to start off with a quick function called setup widget. This is basically just going to create all our widgets, define them, and then add them to the, or not add them to the play screen, but yeah, it's just going to set them up and add them to the base widget. Okay, and then we're going to define something up here, which is going to be the canvas. Yeah, this is equals there. And this canvas is basically just going to be the base widget that holds all the other widgets. So this canvas it's going to take up the whole screen, and then we're just going to add some other different widgets to it. We're going to do down here. So let's start off with a little black background. So it's going to help us to just hide the game while the menu is open. We're going to add a color block, which is basically just a solid color rectangle. We're just going to set the color to black. This is the background, the opacity. I don't want it to just completely block out the game, otherwise players are going to get a bit confused. I just not be able to see stuff happening. Yeah, so we're going to add this background widget to the canvas, which I've already defined up here. We've created a new one. Um, yeah, so, to add a widget to the canvas, we're going to need a canvas slot. So I'm going to add this widget to the canvas with a canvas slot. Then we just need to specify that background widget is being added. So next we need to set the anchors of the slot. So basically what space this background widget takes up, and we want it to take up the whole screen. That anchor is going to be the top left of the screen, and then the bottom right of the screen, which should make it basically cover the whole screen. Should be good. I'm actually going to define something up there because the anchors takes vector2s, which can get a bit messy and a bit unreadable. So we're going to define a little struct to contain these. It's basically going to give them a readable form rather than just being vector2s that we probably duplicate quite a lot. So I'm actually going to just copy code here because it's just something you just want to predefine and probably have throughout your file. I misnamed it there. Should be UI anchors. But yeah, so top left, bottom right, center, and these are basically just vectors. So top left is 0, 0, bottom right 1, 1, and then the center of the screen, which is halfway on horizontal and vertical. And yeah, so these are, we can now just basically do anchors dot top left and get this vector. So it's just a bit easier to read the code. What we do need to do actually is we need to define, we need to add an instance of this struct so we can actually use it. You might want to store this elsewhere in like a helper class or something rather than having to define it in all your files. But yeah, for now we're just going to do this. And now all we have to do is we just do anchors. So create a new anchor object. We need to set the minimum anchor, which is basically the top left. We're going to set it to the top left of the screen, and then the maximum anchor to the bottom right of the screen. So that background should now fill the whole screen. And then what we're going to do is to make the menu like usable, we're just going to quickly add a close button because right now we could get it to open the menu, but we want to be able to close it so the player doesn't, so we don't get stuck in it while we're testing. So I'm actually going to, we want a close button, but I'm actually going to add a container. Otherwise, yeah, we're going to add a container because we want to add some other stuff later on, and we're going to just basically store the close button in that container. So we're going to add a column widget, which is just a stack box. A stack box is just a widget that can be like a container that's horizontal or vertical. I'm going to set the orientation to vertical. I have got that there. But yeah, that's all we should do. And then we just need to again add it to the canvas. This time we're going to put this container in the center of the screen rather than stretching the whole screen because we just kind of want the content in the center. We're going to replace this widget variable here with the column widget, and then we're actually also going to need to do this, which is set the alignment. Otherwise, it's going to be basically the top left of our content is going to be in the center, but we want the center of our content to be in the center. So set the alignment to 0.0, 0.5, 0.5, which is going to align it all by the center of this column widget, which should be good. And then finally, just the close button, which we're going to use to close the menu. It should be fairly simple. If you just add another widget, this one's going to be button underscore quiet, which is a Fortnite button that has some like styling on it by default. And we need to specify the text, so we want it to say like close on the screen. So what we need to do that is this text, or I'm going to click there. Yeah, this text variable requires a message. So we're going to need to define a message up here. So we'll probably do this here. We'll just call it close message. We're going to specify, add a specifier called localizers. Basically marks it to be added to like localization so it can be translated. What we need to do here is just copy that variable we made, put it there. Now it should say close menu on a little button. yeah, again, we'll just copy this, but we're not going to add to the canvas. We want the button to be part of our column. So we're going to need a stack. Let's go box slot rather than a canvas slot. Again, change the widget equal to that. We're going to need to probably get rid of all that. We're going to add some liner widget horizontally. This doesn't really matter now because it's obviously the only widget in there. But later on, we want to make sure it takes up all the space. We're going to make it make the widget basically fill on the horizontal axis. Because when the rest of the inventory is there, we don't want it to just be sat on the left. We want it to be take up more of the screen, and we're going to add some padding. This is just future proofing because right now there's no other widget, so it doesn't make sense to add any padding. But we are just going to add some top padding because we're going to add some widgets above it later on, and I don't want to forget. So there we go. Okay, so we should now have a little button widget that is in the center of the menu. What we want to do is you want it so when that button is clicked, it does something. So if we get this close button widget, if we do on click, all that, yeah, we're going to subscribe to it with our own function that we're going to call on close button pressed. I want it's going to be private, shouldn't be called from elsewhere. And I believe it's going to take widget message. Yeah, widget. This is just the default output you get on that function. But basically, this variable should contain the player who pressed it. We don't really need that. But yeah, so on close button press, we're going to do some close logic. I am going to store this in another function, like store the logic in another function because we want it to be public. So like another file not within this UI can call close on the menu rather than it just having to be done internally. And this can be public, then it's void. And for that, we probably want to add a counterpart, which is going to be the open. This basically is going to add this UI to the player screen because right now it's just some UI that the player actually can't see. So we need to tell Fortnite to add it to the screen. Get the player, do this. This should get the player UI or get player UI. Then this requires the player. So if we do owner, owner isn't a Fortnite player, it's our player wrapper class, but it contains player variable, which we pass into that function. Get that, and now we can do player UI, okay, player UI object. We just add and remove widgets from the object. So we just do add widget, then just get our widget. I add a quick function. I'm going to call get widget to be public. And it's just going to return a widget because we want to be able to, external files might want to return the base widget. So our base widget is the canvas, so we're just going to return that. But yeah, basically down here, add widget, we're just going to add our base widget, which is where we've added all our other widgets to. We're going to add that to the screen. We're going to specify the player underscore UI slot, which is basically just telling the game how we want to handle input. So we want our menu to absorb all input, which basically makes it so the player can click and type, press button, whatnot. Okay, so that should be added to the screen, and we're basically going to copy this, but we're just going to, instead of add widget, we're going to do remove widget. Don't need to specify this. Yeah, so when you call close it, will close the menu. When you call open it, will open it. And then on close button press, we're just going to call that close variable. And we should probably put this here, which is, yeah, we're going to, so basically when the on click of the close button widget is called, it's going to call our on close button pressed function, which should remove this menu from the screen. So we're going to save that. And then now we need to actually create this inventory menu object for each player, which I think we're probably going to want to store in the tutorial player. So we're going to, because each player is going to have their inventory menu. So we're going to need to store that variable somewhere, which is what this class is kind of for, just storing any variables you have. It's not specific to the inventory, so you can put whatever other variables you want on here. Yeah, ours is just for now, just the inventory menu widget, which is going to just be this class. We're going to make it an optional because we need to define it with a reference to when we create this inventory menu class, we need to define it with a reference to the player, which we can't do if we haven't created the player yet. So first we need to make it an optional that might not exist. Um, it's unhappy with this. We need to call using inventory. We call that, it should basically include this file here. It doesn't seem happy, so I'm going to compile verse. It should hopefully happy after that. Okay, so when I've compiled, I've got some verse build errors. Pretty normal. A lot of errors when doing this. So basically, the module where we've got this inventory menu is not public, so other files can't access it, such as this. We're going to need to mark that module as public, which we're going to do in the play manager. Might want a separate file, but for now we're just going to do it here. You basically just need to define the module, which is folder is the module. So the folder's called inventory, so we're going to name this inventory. We're just going to do basically just the same as defining a class. We're going to say inventory, and the inventory module. We're just going to change the access to public. Um, so that everything within this module, such as the inventory menu, can be accessed outside. And now this should be happy. Errors in here because we've not bothered to include. So if we just hover over them, we should be able to copy this, copy the includes we need. So we want the UI, we want the spatial loading, and that might be it. Oh, yeah, if you ever get any of those, just hover over and it should tell you. The Fortnite UI. There we go. That should be it. We should be able to compile now just by clicking this button up here. If you don't have that compile button, also just do it in here. Just click that. Oh, sorry, click that one. Okay. Right. Um, so we've got our optional inventory menu variable that is just going to store this inventory menu. So back in the player manager, we're going to need to do something to, we're going to need to create that menu and set that variable. I'm just going to create a function, do this, make it private. We don't want anywhere else calling it, but put it in a separate function just because I want it to be quite clean and separated. Okay. And we're just going to call this function after the player is added. We need to pass in our tutorial player here. Yeah, so let's create a new object for the inventory menu. Go here, copy the name of our class, define it, and then now, because the tutorial player is already created, we can set the owner when we define this inventory menu class. Then we're going to add another using for inventory again. There we go, so that should be happy. And actually we're going to need to call this, setup widget function, because there's nothing in here that makes it set up the widget itself. That needs to be called when, like manually when we create it. So if we call that, it should initiate all the base widgets, all the child widgets within it. And then the final thing for us to do is set this variable so it can be accessed later. So if we do set tutorial player dot optional inventory menu equal to, because it's an optional variable, we need to wrap the value in option. And we just put that there. We just put the widget inside. Okay, now each player should have an inventory menu opened. But right now, we don't actually have any way for the player to open the menu. Just have the actual widget set up. So for that, we're going to go back in game. We're going to add an input trigger. Where is it? So if you go down here onto the content browser, search input trigger, you should get this. Drag that device in anywhere. And we're going to bind it to a key. You can bind it to any key you want, but I'm just going to make it, because it's inventory, I'm going to make it use the default Fortnite inventory, which should be, I think it's I. And we wanted consume input, so nothing else uses it. We're going to change the description to toggle inventory. Put that afterwards, actually, like that. There we go. That should be it for that setup. Then what we need to do is we're going to need to listen for the input trigger being used Then when it's used, we're going to get that player's inventory menu and we're going to open it. So we need to add an editable. This is going to input trigger. This is going to give us a reference to that input device that we just placed in the editor. So do that, give it a default value. And then in the on begin, we just need to subscribe to it, so listen to it being made. Sorry, listen to players pressing it. We're going to add a new function to pressed and spelled correctly. We're going to define that down here, and should just should just give it an agent, I think. Once again, going to make it private. We don't want the files accessing this, or the classes, or not. And then when this is pressed, we're going to need to open this inventory menu widget. We're going to just basically get that and call the .open function. So to do that, we're going to need to get the tutorial player, which we'll get from this map we've got up here. So if tutorial player is within this map, get it for us. It should just be like that. Then we're going to need to get this optional bit here. We're going to need to check if it exists. It should exist, but because it's optional, you need to check it every time. So we check it by defining the variable, saying it's equal to the optional menu. I'm going to question the optionable, a little question mark. Now this shouldn't be an optional. This is just going to be the inventory menu class, which we can call stuff on. So all we're going to do is just going to call open. That should be it, and we should be able to compile, and hopefully it should be a success. And then the final thing before we go in game, you're going to select your Play Manager device that you placed and select that input trigger that you made, which I'm going to just quickly rename to inventory, or just open inventory, just so that it's a bit clearer if you have multiple. But actually, just before we hop in game, we're going to need to add a little bit of code that I forgot, which is going to be basically looping through every play in the game and manually calling this on player added function. Because when you're editing, when you're like in the UEFN editor in a play session, it won't call on your devices on begin will be called before after player added event has been subscribed to. So you won't call it for existing players that are already on the session. So you need to manually call it for every player. But then after that, if we just go in game and click launch session, and then we should load up into a session. Right. Now that you're in your session, if you just press whatever key you bound it to, which for me was toggle inventory, and it should be the I key. So if I press that, a little menu is going to appear. We don't have any input, which is what we expect. And if we click close menu, it should go away. We just keep pressing I. We should have a little menu that opens and closes. Right, so now that we've got a menu appearing in game, we're going to have to do a little bit more boring boilerplate before we can start adding the actual inventory grid to the UI. Because yeah, we just need some objects and other files to basically store all that info. So for the rest of this this video, we're just going to add some files and set up a quick class. But yeah, we're not going to do. So let's just create a new file, which is going to be called tutorial for inventory first. This file is just going to basically have a class called tutorial for inventory, which each player is going to have one of these, and it's just going to store data for their inventory and handle functions for that. And for now, we're not going to add much more here. I'm gonna quickly define a function called inventory size that we're going to use later on, and this is just going to be how many slots you have in your inventory. So for us, I'm just going to put 20. So that's the inventory object, and we're actually just going to give each player one of those, which all we have to do is just copy this, go into the tutorial player, make a new line, call it inventory, and then just initiate a new object or an inventory type, which it might not be happy about. To fix the errors we're having with the tutorial module being the inventory module being named the same as this variable, just going to rename this folder, but it's a bit buggy, it can be a bit annoying. So instead, we're going to make a new folder, call it whatever we want the module to be called, which is going to be tutorial inventory. I'm going to drag the inventory menu in there and the tutorial inventory class. Then we should just be able to delete this old. You'll also need to replace inventory with tutorial inventory in the player manager and the player class folder. Then if we compile, should be all happy. Okay, then this variable should be happy there. So we've got each player now has this object on them, and then we're going to create one more file, which is just going to be another kind of boilerplate thing. So this is just going to be a module, is going to store the info about all our items. So each item is going to need some info about it, such as the name, the texture. The texture will be linked to the item icons that we have. But yeah, we basically just need something to store those, which is going to be a little module so we can access that anywhere without having to have a reference to it. So just define a module up here. And we're not going to add much to it now. We're just going to quickly also define an item. It's going to be base item class. It's just going to have an ID, be a string. Add more here if you need, but we'll delve into that a little bit more later on. But it's just going to be a name, string, name, texture. That should be all we need. We might need to add a reference for this. Yeah, so that should be all the files we're going to need for this tutorial series. Created, and we've got a base down. We've got a little menu appearing whenever you press I. Then in the next part, we're going to go over actually creating a little grid that contains slots that will contain items. And we're just going to do that in this UI class. But yeah, we'll do that in the next part. And then we'll give some logic to the inventory file that we've just made. Right, see you in part 2. Make sure to join the Discord in the description if you have any issues. And we should be able to help you, and subscribe and give a little comment.